Hello and welcome to this Purchasing Insight webinar, Electronic Invoicing, the Countdown to 2018. As many of you know, the ability to accept electronic invoice is due to become a mandatory legal requirement across the European Union next year. This applies to public sector organisations. And now in the middle of 2017, it's a good time to take stock and check that proper plans are in place to ensure that deadlines are met. The things that we're going to cover today are the current status of e-invoicing, exactly what is happening in 2018 and why is this important, who does this affect, is it just public sector or does it affect a wider community, what are the deadlines, and how will the parallel developments in some of the new technologies like blockchain, how will they impact? And also we'll look at how best to approach an e-invoicing solution adoption. Now, just before we start, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Canon for their support in making this webinar happen. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Fabrizio Falzerano on this webinar. Hi, Fabrizio.
Good afternoon. Hi, Peter. Thank you for having me on this call.
You're very welcome. Okay, let's start with looking at the current state of e-invoicing. From a global perspective, there's a very interesting landscape. Latin America continues to lead the world, with Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina now having mandates across all areas of their economy. They're not alone. Other countries in Latin America also mandate. But some of these more mature countries like Mexico and Brazil have close to 100% adoption. Asia is rather fragmented, with some countries like India not allowing e-invoicing, insisting still on paper documents. But there are exceptions to that. Singapore and South Korea, for example, are making significant progress. Africa is behind the rest of the world, but just as Africa kind of leapfrogged some technological developments, like in telecommunications, moving straight towards mobile, and they now have a very sophisticated mobile infrastructure and applications, they may well do the same with electronic invoicing. North America continues to grow in line with the growth in P2P adoption. From a European perspective, I think Europe is a special case. It's a special case because of the single market and because of VAT. The Nordic countries, are, with Latin America, are amongst the leaders in the world. Many of them having fairly mature mandates in place and very high levels of adoption. And also across Europe, as PEPL has become more and more established in public sector as a set of tools to help with electronic purchasing, we see electronic invoicing being adopted more, and we're seeing that the mandate introduced from next year. From a technology point of view, very little has changed over the last 10 or so years. Regrettably, e-invoicing is still interpreted widely as the electronic transmission of a paper invoice. In other words, the emailing an image of a paper document, for example. Even scanning paper invoices to extract the data from them and turning it into electronic data is also interpreted as electronic invoicing. PDF invoicing is much more acceptable as a form of electronic invoicing. There's now some very sophisticated tools to extract data automatically from PDF invoices. The things that we would really think of as pure electronic invoices, XML and EDI, of course, are still around, but there are some technologies emerging which could change this technology landscape quite considerably. So what's actually happening in 2018? Well, in May of 2016, the EU directive for electronic invoices in public procurement came into force. And what that did was the directive defined a requirement that all public bodies must be able to receive electronic invoices for all of their larger contracts, the contracts that are managed under OJU rules. And this obligation is specifically to be able to receive invoices that comply to the European electronic invoice standard. Now this is quite important. This European electronic invoice standard is a semantic standard. A semantic standard describes the intentions of an invoice document. For example, describing the information that's required, things like quantity of goods ordered or description of services, prices, tax information, and those kinds of things, the basic requirements of an invoice. And that's in contrast to a syntactic standard, which defines the shape that that data needs to be in. The European standard is very much semantic, quite deliberately. It doesn't want to define the type of technology that's used, simply to describe what an electronic invoice is. All public bodies at a national level must have implemented these changes by the 27th of November 2018. So it's just a little bit more than a year away. For non-national bodies, local governments and so on, countries may allow a delay of no more than 12 months. What does this mean for suppliers to the public sector? Well, on the surface, not a great deal. Suppliers are not obliged to send electronic invoices. However, some member states are already making this mandatory. I think we should bear in mind that even when that mandate is not in place, the majority of OJU tenders make very clear reference to the ability of suppliers to send invoices electronically. And suppliers would be naive if they think that there is no expectation of a requirement for them to send invoices electronically by the fourth quarter of 2018. And the impact is much wider than public sector and its suppliers. As we see the growth in the use of electronic invoices generated by this mandate, it's very likely that we'll see it more widely adopted. That's not certain, but I think it's quite likely. So why is this important, and exactly who's affected? Well, if we think of this from a strategic point of view and think about the way European countries will be looking at the world, and we think about some of the legislation that's been in place for quite some time. In 2006, for example, there was an EU directive that imposed the same status for e-invoices as paper invoices. And the intent there was to gently encourage businesses to use electronic invoices. It had very little impact. And contrast that with Mexico, for example, who in 2011, much more recently, began to mandate e-invoices. In those 6 years, they've managed to get adoption up to close to or at 100%. So the Europeans can't have failed to see this, and may even be somewhat embarrassed that these so-called developing countries are showing Europe how it should be done. This success will not have gone unnoticed. But one of the very significant consequences of this for Latin America is countries like Mexico, Brazil and Argentina have much more effective tax policing structures in place now compared to any European government. So what's the impact of this, this new legislation? Well, for public sector, the impact is immediate, and there's a need for planning and investment already. As far as the impact on suppliers to public sector, although there's no obligation to send electronic invoices, there will be an unspoken requirement to be able to do so. And as far as other businesses are concerned, well, there are very few businesses that don't supply anything to public sector, so there is a need to have an electronic invoicing strategy in place even there. So what of the future? I think the case for greater control of tax collection, like in Latin America, is absolutely compelling. It may be that this legislation isn't strong enough, and despite most predictions, it could be that the adoption of electronic invoicing is half-hearted, in which case I think we'll see a stronger mandate. Nevertheless, I think many member states will be following the lead of countries like the Nordic countries and being slightly stronger in terms of mandates that they impose. But I think it's emerging technology like blockchain that might have the most significance in the future. And indeed, it may make invoices virtually obsolete. So let's look at some of the emerging technologies. There's much said about artificial intelligence. Now that computing power is available everywhere, the use of artificial intelligence is being seen as a game changer. I'm not quite sure whether in the P2P space and the accounts payable space, the effect of artificial intelligence will be as dramatic as some predict. But there are certainly very useful applications in things like big data analysis, the ability to be able to spot trends in huge amounts of data, to explore and identify duplicate payments, or the attributes of fraudulent transactions. This could be a very powerful application of artificial intelligence. Equally strongly hyped is the use of robotic process automation. My own view is that in the P2P space, many of the business processes we use are automated very well by existing technology. But there's no doubt that robotic process automation will replace some manually intensive tasks. For example, there's a very powerful use case in the collation of data from disparate sources for reporting purposes. And there are one or two other highly specialist use cases that have a very significant or very profitable business case and business justification. I think it's in the area of blockchain where there is the most significant interest and potential to change things in the accounts payable and P2P space. In case you've never heard of blockchain, I mean, you will certainly have heard of Bitcoin, which is the killer app for blockchain. Just as in the early 1990s, email was the killer app of the internet, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is the most important current app for blockchain. Without getting technical, blockchain is effectively a single shared ledger of transactions. So instead of different members of a supply chain holding records of transactions like purchase orders and invoices and things like that, it would be possible using a blockchain to all share the same ledger. And that gives us the concept of a single view of the truth. Buyers and suppliers would share exactly the same transactional information. And on the blockchain, it's possible to develop things called smart contracts. Smart contracts are those contracts where events are triggered automatically as a result of other events happening. So, for example, if goods or services have been ordered and the record of that order is stored on a blockchain, which is a single view of the truth, and delivery confirmation, satisfactory delivery confirmation, is also shared there. The smart contract could automatically trigger payment, and there will be no need for an invoice to create that trigger. There would be no need for three-way matching. So that this blockchain, the application of blockchain, could have a very significant effect going forward. So what are the implications and actions required from the change in legislation? Well, for public sector, clearly there's a need for immediate action. National bodies should already be in implementation mode, and non-national bodies should at least be planning. You need to understand the legislation and what the deadlines are, assess current capabilities, and I would recommend working with technology providers who already understand this space. Suppliers to public sector, while there's no legal requirement to do anything at the moment, it would be very unwise not to prepare, as it's very likely that public sector organisations will want to justify any investment in electronic invoices by creating more efficient processes and encouraging suppliers to send electronic invoices. And even if there's already, you already have an e-invoicing capability, it's important to understand what the wider options are. I think being able to supply electronic invoices in a variety of formats actually makes you more attractive as a potential to potential customers. For other suppliers who don't see supply to public sector as core to their business, I think it's important to realise that this change in legislation is likely to act as a boost for a wider use of electronic invoices generally. And the reason for this is it's much easier to build a business case for this kind of collaborative technology when lots of other people have already adopted it. Just as with supplies to public sector, I think it's important to understand options and just to recognise that it's likely to become a more important requirement going forward. In terms of emerging technologies, I think that the scope for the use of things like artificial intelligence and robotic process automation is not as significant as some would have us believe, but where they do apply, I think the business case can be compelling. And similarly, blockchain is some way off, but don't be fooled into thinking that it might not happen. It absolutely will, and it's very important that finance and AP people are familiar with it. Don't be intimidated by the technology. It sounds very complex, but it's important to be up to date and not be left behind. And again, solution providers can act as a very good source of information for the landscape and how it's evolving. In terms of wider purchase to pay, it's often said that an electronic invoice is only useful if it has an electronic purchase order to match with, and I think that's certainly true. So when thinking about electronic invoicing, I think it's important to ensure that it's complementary to other P2P initiatives. It's really important to have a position on purchase to pay and have a strategy in place. And again, solution providers are the perfect source of information and support as far as this is concerned. Okay, at this point, I'd like to hand over to Fabrizio, who's sharing the panel with me, to talk about strategies for implementing electronic invoices. Over to you, Fabrizio.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you. And yes, again, thank you for having me on your webinar today. I'm just to introduce myself. My name is Fabrizio Falzarano. I'm part of Canon Europe. I look after our business in the area of finance and accounting and procurement services. So yes, I've just been asked to really try to give you some recommendations from a Canon perspective of how to best, let's say, adopt a solution in this area. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I will be going through some tips or some recommendations on my side. So if we go on the first slide, first of all, Pete, if you can move on the next slide, yes, the next one. Yeah, so first of all, I think it's good to start giving you some top-line recommendations. So the first one, in terms of adopting electronic invoicing, is pretty much continuing on what Pete was saying. So the first point is think beyond electronic invoicing whenever you want to adopt electronic invoicing. So think about the bigger picture. Think about procurement to pay processes, think about order to cash processes, and really trying to take this as an opportunity to improve not just the invoice receivable or the invoice delivery, but also, you know, the parts that are connected to that. The second point for me is about building a roadmap. So you obviously want to get to a stage where you achieve 100% electronic invoicing. You will have a big push from regulations, as we've seen, but really you cannot do that in in a day. You need to build a roadmap. Probably the best way is to do that through working closely with a partner who can help you on that. And there is a way for you to basically being able to live in a world that is a hybrid world of both paper and electronic, and then achieve that full 100% electronic invoicing. The third point for me is, okay, in terms of technology, what are the ways to do this? And from Canon's perspective, we are really advocating the the importance of looking outside of your ERP, outside of your finance system. Think about solutions that can help you achieve what you want to achieve in this area and beyond that, but without looking into expensive projects to really boost your current capabilities of your finance system. Think about a solution that can sit outside of your ERP, talking to your finance system in ERP all the times, but think these solutions as more flexible, as more cost efficient, and quicker to deploy. So we very much are behind this point. The fourth area for me is around multi-channel strategy for receival or delivery of invoices. It is true there is a big push from the regulators in this area. We see adoption growing of electronic invoicing, but still we live in a hybrid world. So think about a strategy that can allow you to most efficiently live in this hybrid world for the time being, and obviously have a roadmap, as I said, to achieve 100%. The last point for me here in terms of recommendation is, the best way to look into this is to really consider yourself as in cooperation and in collaboration with the ecosystem of suppliers, of your customers. Everybody wants to move in this direction because it's a win-win scenario. So have a conversation with your customers around having them receiving electronic invoices, and the same with your suppliers, having them sending you electronic invoices, and work with a partner who can assist you in both areas. This is also a recommendation from my side. It's not just about P2P or order to cash. It's it's an ecosystem. So look into that. If I want to zoom a little bit into the view of accounts receivable, so the seller's view, so about distributing an electronic invoice. Well, what I've depicted here is a simple figure that shows, highlighted in blue on the right side, the point where you actually deliver your invoices electronically. And as I said, you want to be able to do this in multiple formats. It can be an email PDF, it can be a customer portal, it can be, of course, being able to use the PayPal network if you are sending this to a public sector organization in Europe. But also look beyond that, and that means if you move a step before the distribution of an invoice, the importance of the composition. There is a great discussion around enhancing the design of an invoice, enhancing the impact of an invoice. Remember that an invoice is a business critical document, and it's a way to improve your customer experience through that invoice. So it's about making sure that you can have personalized messages. So take care of that as well. Keep that in mind. And finally, I will say the importance of the submission of the data. Think about a solution that can help you merging data properly from multiple systems. And it's not just billing data, it's also CRM data, it's also data from perhaps multiple finance systems. So you want to have a solution that can help you taking care of, having the right information delivered to the customer in a bill. Ultimately, it's about monitoring and reporting the whole process. It's also very important. It is something that a solution in this area, a proper end-to-end accounts receivable solution will provide you with. What are the benefits? So if you look into accounts receivable optimization, then of course, the first point is cost reductions. It's going to be about reducing the cost of delivering that invoice as a mail and paper printed document. But there are also efficiencies that you gain in terms of time to invoice. Obviously, this is very important, right, for credit collection. So you're going to reduce that time substantially. You're going to have efficiencies in the way you produce and deliver the invoice in a much shorter time. The billing control, I mentioned it already. So you want to take care of the quality of the data and make sure that there are no errors happening. So you will improve on that. And also it's about improving the layout, the information on the invoice to make it more personalized. Finally, the compliance. Of course, through a proper optimization of the process, it's not just about being compliant with the format of delivery of the electronic invoice. Invoice is about being compliant with the whole process, being able to also trace, how many invoices you have sent out, in which format, how many have failed, and so on. To be in control of that process. If we move on the other side, so a few words on the buyer's view. So Pete has been talking about this as well, the procurement to pay process, and looking at procurement to pay beyond the actual receival of the invoice. So for us, we really talk about P2P as a solution that sits on top of your finance system, and it's an end-to-end solution. So it's important, you see there in the middle, yes, it's important in blue highlighted the way you receive your invoices to have a multi-channel receival. So whether it's, again, through a portal where your supplier uploads the invoice, whether it's coming as an email, or indeed, whether if you're a public sector organization, whether you are enabled to receive it through PayPal format. Well, it's not just that, right? So you want to get efficiencies from what is happening before. So it's very important to look into procurement optimization, to look into purchase orders, electronic requisitioning, and so on. And also it's important on what is happening after you receive that invoice, to have a solution in place that allows you to really take the most out of automation in terms of exception handling, in terms of posting, matching, and so on. If we look into the benefits of having an end-to-end procurement to pay solution, well, we very much talk about the visibility of spend, the visibility of cash flow. So it's about having a solution that I always like to say you work with invoice data rather than invoices, rather than documents. And this is what you achieve. You are able to really look into the end-to-end process and look into your KPIs and work with that in the process and have visibility of spend and cash flow. The second point is, of course, the efficiencies, the automation, particularly in accounts payable, right? So when you have automated matching, you boost your productivity, you have valuable staff doing things that are more valuable for them in accounts payable, you reduce the errors and so on. Spend control. This is about really being able to control the the way you spend your money, and ultimately it's improving your spend visibility, your spend management, and you can do that if you have been improving the end-to-end procurement to pay process. If you have any electronic procurement solution that is also linked with an accounts payable automation solution. Finally, compliance. Compliance of a digitized procurement to pay process, it makes it easier to be audited. It's very easy for you to then look into, again, the percentage of electronic invoices, but also the time that it takes for you to pay those invoices. In the UK, there is, for example, a new legislation that requires now businesses to report around the time that it takes for them to pay the supplier. So you will be able to be compliant also on that part because you can report much easily. I just want to spend now a few words on a case, just to give you an example here of the things that are happening there and what customers are doing. In our case, our customers are here. We have a large vehicle rental company. We've been working with them for a few years. They had a process that was significantly directed toward billing in paper format, and this was across multiple countries in Europe, and they literally didn't have a multi-channel strategy in place for delivering those invoices. So we helped them by making sure that they could have a roadmap to get there. So if we move on the next slide, Pete, what we have done, we have first of all enable their customers to decide the way they want them to receive the invoice. So in this sense, we really help our customers to be in the powerful position. So they can choose whether they want an email PDF to be received, whether they want a paper document or EDI, or even using a portal. So this is the first point. The second point is around being able to deliver these across multiple countries, and you see them there across Italy, Germany, Spain, Benelux region, France, and the UK. So overall here we are talking about over 3 million documents. What is also important to realize in this context of the discussion we had today is that they are seeing a growing number of public sector clients. So more and more public sector is making use of higher vehicles in Europe, so they have more and more contract with large public sector bodies. So today they are enabled with PayPal, and they can send electronically invoices to those public sector customers. And then, of course, the savings in terms of postal costs that have been eliminated, the operational costs in general that have been reduced, and the sales outstanding that is also reduced. So a set of benefits overall. Okay, so that was just a quick view on my side. I hope this has been helpful from a Canon perspective. Of course, we have been in this market for many years in terms of providing both accounts receivable services and procurement to pay services. And we like to say that we come in this market from an imaging point of view. We look at an invoice as an image, and whether it's a digital or paper, we're able to help in all ways. That's all from my side, Pete. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Well, I'm conscious of time, but we've probably got time to cover 2 questions that have been submitted as we've been speaking. The first question was about blockchain. The question is, when we talk about blockchain becoming important, does that mean we expect that to be paying suppliers using Bitcoin? No, that's not really the issue. Bitcoin and blockchain are often seen as the same thing. That they're not. Cryptocurrencies are just an application of blockchain technology. What I think we're going to see is another application of that technology, to have a single shared ledger across supply chains, which will allow smart contracts and the automation of payment rather than waiting for a three-way match. And there's another interesting question. Brexit, I guess this would affect those of you in the UK. What impact does or will Brexit have on this legislation? Well, actually, all of the EU directives are automatically written into UK law. So, with or without Brexit, this new mandate to be able to receive electronic invoices will still be a requirement. It has no impact. So, again, conscious of time, running out of time, so we'll leave those questions as they are. And of course, all attendees will receive a recording of this event, so that those of you who may have colleagues who couldn't attend will be able to see this presentation. I'd like to thank you all for attending, and a special thank you again to Fabrizio.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you all.
Thank you, and see you next time.